Excellent. So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the board at Amigos de Bolsa, Chica and Dara for recommending me. And hopefully we'll have a fun time tonight talking about some of the animals that can be seen along Southern California. I'm a little sad that I'm only seeing a bunch of names right now. I appreciate those of you who put your faces on the screen. I actually keep the hi. I keep the screen open. I like to see everybody just as though we're in an auditorium. So if you feel so inclined, go ahead and put that beautiful mug of yours back up on the screen. And along those lines too, you know, I think a big part of giving a presentation is what you want to hear and your questions and interests. So while on one hand I might see you doze off, and that's good too, it gives me an indication of where I need to pump it up. If you have questions, feel free to, you know, give a wave or use the little engagement button or type your questions to Amber. She'll be moderating the whole time. I'm happy to talk about anything you want or ask questions during the talk, and then we'll leave some time after as well. So Bernardo Alps is here, my husband. He's on the other side of the country right now doing marine mammal observer work, protecting our protected species, but I want to give him a shout out and thanks because some of these photos are his, otherwise. So let's get going and let's have some fun. So, well, we'll just, let's see, let's start with a slide, if we can get it to advance. So I think that Amber already told you enough about me. You really don't need to know more, but I can't help but want to give a shout out to all of the affiliations and great people that I have a chance to work with and have now over the years. I started, as Amber said, 20 years ago, when I was just a wee tot, you know, 5 years old. I'm just kidding. I actually started with the Cabrillo Whale Watch Naturalist program out of the Cabrillo Aquarium in San Pedro. When I used to drive out here, I actually was born and raised out in Indio, out in the Palm Springs area, and boy, just like a fish out of water, I just didn't fit and didn't really fit in until I found my way out here and really have immersed myself in the world of whales, and soon started working at the Cabrillo Aquarium in a variety of capacities, and I'm really excited now to be working with them as their boat programs manager, and also in our today's world doing all their virtual stuff. So check out their website, can't help but want to plug that. As I go through the talk, I'm going to be talking a lot about animals that can be seen off Southern California. And I'm going to just say, let's forget about, you know, the shit we're in right now, just to put it really bluntly. I haven't been on the water a whole lot. A lot of people haven't been on the water a whole lot. I know there's a lot of amazing things going on out there, but I think this year's a little bit different. So when I'm talking about generalities and time frames, I'm kind of talking about all the pre-madness that we're in. So we'll just be able to escape from everything for an hour, and just everybody take a moment and picture some blue skies, which is why I use this beautiful mangrove shot, some blue skies, some sunny air, and escape to the worlds of whales. So this graphic is really kind of, whoops, jumped ahead there. So looking at the world of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, the entire group of animals is called cetaceans. It at one point was the order. Science is ever evolving, and we now know that the order has actually been merged. I don't want to get too far into that unless anybody, or we have some taxonomy geeks on board. We can talk about it later, but the order is now merged with the artiodactyls. So they've made it really easy for us in the scientific world. If you wanted to refer to the order of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and hippos and all their artiodactyls, it's called CETACEA. However, the group of animals we'll be talking about tonight are the cetaceans. So just the whales, dolphins, and porpoises, of which there are 90 species about. You know, that's kind of an ever-changing, ever-evolving as well. A lot of that has to do with the great science that we do have, molecular science, as well as morphological, looking at all the external features, internal features, but then also looking at range and genetics. Right now, there's classified as 90 species. And you can see how it breaks down here, and we'll be exploring these two different groups a little bit further, but we have our mysticetes, the baleen whales, the animals on the left side here, all facing to the right. And then we have our odontocetes, or our toothed whales, on the right side, all facing left. And as you can see, that mysticetes, there are only 4 families of whales and only 14 species. It's definitely fewer in species, but much larger in biomass in general. And then you have your odontocetes, your toothed whales, where 10 families and 75 species, including 1 extinct. Does anybody know our extinct species that was recently declared extinct, I think in the late 90s? Bernardo, is that right? I'm going to look to him often because he's my encyclopedia. And anybody? It looks like Kendra might have it. Kendra and Paul, you got it? Come on, you're gonna have your mute button closer.
Is it the river dolphin?
Yeah, the Yangtze River dolphin, and was declared extinct. Hadn't been seen, and unfortunately, and we'll do another real quick poll. Can anybody tell me the animal that's on the verge of extinction, just critically endangered and breaking everyone's heart? Probably 4 or 5 left in the wild right now.
Vaquita?
Yeah, the vaquita, right? They're located just south of the border in the Gulf of California. And with fishing and entanglement, boy, they are really suffering. We're losing them very, very rapidly. We've gone from 500 about 20 years ago to, like I said, maybe 5 today, if we're lucky, unfortunately. So that's actually the smallest of all cetaceans as well. So our mysticetes, this is the large whales that you think about. They have 2 blowholes, just like we do, two air passageways or 2 air openings. Theirs are on the top of their head, ours is on the front of their face, right? Thinking about very large whales, baleen in their mouth that they use to filter feed. So they don't chew, they don't have any teeth, they don't mash their food, they're just filter feeding or straining it out of the water. And they don't have any type of echolocation, although they do create sounds and communicate to some degree. Very little is known about how they use their sounds. And most of these animals are migratory, so they are going to higher elevations for foraging and then lower elevations, usually for mating and breeding. And here you can see this humpback whale whose baleen, that shows very nicely the baleen coming down from the upper jaw. So this is the upper jaw of the humpback whale. Its blowholes would be here, kind of at the back of the mouth. And then this is that lower jaw. And we'll look at some more pictures of that. But this animal happened to come up out of the water. It's in a maneuver called a lunge feed, where it's coming below the prey, opening its mouth very wide and engulfing the prey at the surface. And then here you can see a really nice illustration of baleen and the mechanism of it here. So it's hanging down from the upper jaw. They have individual plates side by side of baleen. Some species have some 50 to 75 on each side. The blue whale, the largest of all species of baleen whales, or all whales in the world, has up to 400 plates on one side. And those are smashed right next to each other. The inside is kind of the working side of the baleen, and it's matted. We'll look at, I think, the picture of it here in a moment, but it's matted, and that's what catches all the prey as the water gushes out of those baleen plates. And our odontocetes, or our toothed whales, a very, very large range in size. And you could see that from that poster illustration, where you had large animals such as the sperm whale. It can be up to about 65 feet. And then you have down to the smallest, the vaquita that we mentioned, coming in at about 4, under 4 to under 5 feet long, short. So a very, very large range in size. They do all have teeth. Most of them are monodonts, so the same tooth all the way around its mouth, having the similar dentition all the way around. And it varies between if they, sperm whales only have teeth on the lower jaw. Some animals only have teeth in the upper jaw. And we have some that have the beaked whales have teeth that protrude up out of their mouth. So you have a variety of different types of dentition, but they typically all have similar teeth. They do have a single blowhole, so only one external opening, and we're going to look at that in just a moment, but the primary purpose for that is echolocation. All odontocetes also utilize communication, and the majority of it, sound for communication, and the majority of that is for their social structure. They have a very complex social structure. We have animals such as the killer whales who are have a matriarchal society, so they're with their mother for their entire life. Even these big, large males are with their mom for their entire lives, leaving the pod to mate and then coming back. It varies by species. Also, you know, whether or not it is a, you know, matriarchal or if they're staying with their pod. Dolphins, large pods of dolphins have what we call a fission fusion society. So they move within smaller groupings, but always kind of coming back and associating with those same animals. So they're very, very social and very tight-knit societies. The other side of that, I should have mentioned, our mysticetes are not social really at all. Well, not at all, but not to the extent that odontocetes are. For the most part, mysticetes are moving to a similar location where they're going to feed, and then moving to a similar location where they're going to breed, where they have to overlap because, well, you know, that's how breeding works. But they're not necessarily going with family groups to these places back and forth. They don't stay with their family or, you know, any connection. I liken it to walking down the street in New York City. You might end up going to the same restaurant as somebody else, but that doesn't mean you're related. The other side of that is you might end up at the same nightclub, maybe even at the same nightclub as the people you saw at the restaurant, but again, you're not necessarily related to them. So that's just going to the same place for the same usage. Now back to our odontocetes. They don't have the same migratory patterns as large whales. They typically are more engaged with following prey. So they'll disperse and move around to follow prey, but they don't have that same latitudinal migration. So here's a closer look at echolocation. And you can see this illustration of a dolphin and its skull and lower jaw. And so if you think about our air passageways, right, we have two lungs, we have the air passageways that come up and then lead to the air openings on our face. And whales are the same way, with the two passageways going up to their blowholes. Well, in the case of all odontocetes, one of those air passageways has been closed and adapted to help create the pressure needed and the air needed for echolocation. So one of those air passageways leads to these air sacs that's just under the surface. And if you think of these little air sacs, and then there's little muscles at the opening of the air sacs. And if you think about them as similar to like little balloons, if a balloon is full of air and then you pinch the top and you're letting out little bits, you get sound squeaks and pinch whistles. And that's very much how odontocetes will create their own sound, or biosonar, which then they focus that sound through a fatty tissue kind of in what we would think of as the forehead area, and then that is emitted out into the oceanscape, and the sound reverberations will bounce off of food, prey, potentially predators as well. It also is believed to aid in navigation. They have a very interestingly adapted lower jaw that's filled with fat, and that fat will conduct the sound. So that's actually how they receive sound, is through the fatty tissue inside of the lower jaw, and it the sound vibrates up into a channel up into that ear canal area. I mean, if you think about it, we don't create light, but the way we see light is sort of similar, and kind of what's happening here is they're receiving these sounds, the vibrations are then moved up to their brain, and then they actually can process it and get a pretty good visual, it's believed, of what's going on around them. And for anybody who wants to dig a little bit deeper, one of the best resources on the planet is for marine mammals of any type is the Society for Marine Mammalogy. It is our professional organization, but they have really done a lot to grow into outreach and presenting a lot of really amazing accessible information, including their conservation and science section, where they have species information, including, again, many intensely taxonomic people that want to get more into Artiodactyla or any of the other definitions, but they also have a host of species fact sheets. And interestingly enough, they have worked very closely with Wikipedia, and they have biologists now helping edit Wikipedia pages. So most information that you find on marine mammals on Wikipedia should have been vetted by the Society for Marine Mammalogy's committee, and usually has indication and reference. So it is pretty a reliable source, but those places are, those sheets are also on the website. I have to give a shout out too, because my mom just signed in. So hi there. Anyway, moving on. So, a quick poll, you know, is everybody, well, you're maybe not necessarily in today's world, we can be watching this from anywhere, but are people from Southern California originally? And all right, nice show of hands. How many? So probably many of you have been whale watching, hopefully. Maybe you've been out on a boat. I mean, many people grew up watching whales. You know, like I said, I was raised out in India, so we didn't go on field trips to the ocean. But I know that a lot of schools here in Southern California have, for, you know, and for many years gone out on whale watch boats to see whales. And that really happened happens during the winter and spring, during the gray whale migration. As a matter of fact, it's a shameless plug in many ways, but also a really neat little fun fact that I love to share, that John Olguin from the Cabrillo Marine Aquarium was the first person that said, hey, you know what, we've got these fishing boats that are sitting at the dock during the winter. They can't really get out. There's not much fishing. And we've got whales going by. Why aren't we taking kids out to see whales? And really so developed helped to start the ecotourism as it is today for the whale watching industry. It definitely did start here in Southern California, the first boats going out in San Diego, and then, like I said, John started taking kids out as well. So it's a lot of fun, and in normal worlds, there's kids going out still, you know, most weekdays in January, February, and March to see gray whales. And these gray whales make a very predictable migration along our coastline, which is why we get to see them, and why we have such a successful ecotourism to get out and see them, is because it's a predictable migration. And we're going to talk about them more in just a minute, but the point being that, you know, for decades, gray whales were our hot topic, and boy, no place else in the world that you can see gray whales as well as here in Southern California. But really things have changed, and I've talked to, you know, I train whale watch naturalists, part of the Cabrillo Whale Watch Naturalist program at the aquarium, and we get 140 volunteers every year that we train to go out on boats and talk about whales. And it's really fun talking to some of them who you know, have only been whale watching in the last 5 years or 10 years, and who are like, you know, no whales on my trip in mid-August. And I'm like, mid-August, you know, 10 years ago, we weren't even going out in mid-August. Well, maybe now 15 years ago, but it's really great now. Things have changed, and we're really a year-round destination, and one of the best places to see whales year-round up and down our coast. If we look at from San Diego to Santa Barbara, or even up into Monterey, you are not getting better anywhere else in the world than here. Accessibility, how close they are to shore, cost, weather conditions, everything put together, and the variety of species. It is one of the best places to see whales any time of year. And here are two of the main species that I'm talking about: blue whales and humpback whales that we can see here sporadically during the winter for humpback whales, but during spring, summer, and even into the fall, we're seeing the largest whale on the planet. And then humpback whales that many people thought they had to go to Hawaii to see are putting on amazing shows here in Southern California. And I say shows in the amazing natural way, obviously, not. This is a nice collage that I'll give, that Bernardo put together, talking about our very, very busy oceans here in Southern California. So while we had the increase of these animals coming into our area, it really overlaps with the very, very heavily utilized ocean habitat. Gray whales during the winter is one thing, and in spring we don't have a lot of boating going on, or not nearly as much, but boy, these spring, summer, and fall animals coming through are really overlapping with some very, very heavily used oceans for many, many things, as you can see here, sport and industry. So so here's our coastline, and of course narrowing in to the Southern California Bight. As I mentioned before, from San Diego to Santa Barbara is the Southern California Bight, one of the primary areas that, generally what I'll be talking about mostly here, but when we look at the Southern California Bight, it's really unique in a lot of the animals that we see here. And as far as whales concerned, can anybody remember how many species of whales, except for I have a few experts on board here, but how many, can anybody remember, maybe just a show of fingers, how many species of whales there are in the world? Anybody? I see some people mouthing the answer, that's right.
89.
89, yeah, 90, very good. Okay. Yeah, so 90 species of whales in the world. 28 have been documented in the Southern California Bight. So a third of all whale species. And if you think about the size of the ocean and the size of the planet and how small really the Southern California Bight is, taking it back to even just the West Coast here and looking at the very, very small area that is the Southern California Bight, a third of all species of cetaceans have been documented here. We have the cold currents coming down from the north. We have the warm currents coming up from the south, of course, making our beautiful temperate conditions that we get here. But then you also have this really amazing bathymetry, the topography of the ocean floor, the hills and valleys here. And as the currents come washing, the currents come in from offshore, when they hit that shallower water, especially the steep hills, those really steep inclines, it pulls all the nutrients from the ocean floor up to the surface where it's met with sunlight. And what we know sunlight and nutrients do is create a really, really rich environment. It's kind of the basis of life. So you can see here, this is all the deep area, the continental shelf, but then when you zoom in even closer, you see that we just have tons of these ridges and canyons. The area between Catalina and Palos Verdes gets to 3,000 feet. So it's a very, very deep area. But then some of the inclines are very steep. It goes from drop off straight up. It's not a slow incline. And those are the areas where we see the richest habitat. As a matter of fact, here, zooming into the area between Catalina and the Palos Verdes Peninsula, here I am in San Pedro. You can see me sitting right about there. You can see that we have a very, very steep drop off right off of the Palos Verdes Peninsula. It's one of the reasons why you can stand on the Palos Verdes Peninsula and see whales like sperm whales, blue whales, humpback whales, an amazing amount of animals that can be seen from shore because of this drop off that's immediately offshore. Another very rich known habitat is the Redondo Canyon. So again, talking about that upwelling, if you have currents coming in this dark blue area and then suddenly hitting this steep wall, it's pulling all of that nutrients up to the surface. So these, the steepest areas are where we see the most small life starting, right? That's where the nutrients have pulled to the sunlight and you get an abundance of phytoplankton and then zooplankton. We see an abundance of krill and other types of plankton congregating in these areas where the yellow is. And that's the kind of the basis of the oceanic food chain. So in those areas, we'll also see high abundance of dolphins feeding on the small fish and other animals that are drawn there by the abundance of plankton. So those are always really, really rich habitats. That tends to be some of the areas where we'll see these summer and fall whales as well. The humpback whales, blue whales, fin whales are all moving through our water foraging. They're looking for these really, really rich habitats. These green lines refer to the gray whale migrations or the gray whale corridors that they tend to prefer. And that now we're looking at animals that are transiting through our area instead of staying and foraging. So they're not really looking for prey. Gray whales head up to the Arctic where they feed. So these whales will be moving along these corridors. This one, this line here is looking at Point Doom to Point Vicente here, and then down to Dana Point. There's kind of a straight line where gray whales tend to navigate by coastal markers. So you can see that they're moving just along point to point. The majority of gray whales actually migrate offshore behind Catalina Island. And then the light line is where you can see sometimes during the northbound migration, you may get cow-calf pairs that are hugging the coast and coming in really closely. So it gives you a little bit of an idea where some of the richer spots are up in the Santa Monica Bay, San Pedro area, but also just gets to the point of what is drawing those rich areas. And it's typically the sharp drop-offs. So we're going to look at some species here, and some of this information, these illustrations that you'll see throughout for each species are drawn by Peter Fulkins, and he collaborated with Bernardo and I when we did a presentation that Amber mentioned. We actually worked up a program with the State Lands Commission and primarily funded through Chevron. It was funded through Chevron Refinery to train their mariners, all of their captains and any of the mariners that work with their company on ship strike avoidance, ship strike and whale and sea turtle ship strike avoidance. So it was really great to be able to work with them and pull together numerous resources to talk to them about the variety of species that can be seen here throughout the year, and then how to navigate around them and how to identify what their risk factor is. So gray whales, again, we talked about gray whales being one of those whales that a lot of people have had a chance to get out and see, fortunately, because they're the ones that are, have been migrating along our coast, and we get to see them during the, like I said, many people, even as children, got to get out and see a gray whale. You can see this beautiful illustration here really shows the markings and patterns on gray whales. You know, when I was first starting in this, in the program and learning about whales, I always learned that the scars and patterns on the whales were caused just by their barnacles. And then I got a chance to go down to the lagoons and see gray whale calves, and have seen over time numerous gray whales, and you realize these are their patterns, these are their natural markings. They get more by scarring and barnacles and probably interactions with each other, but a lot of these are their natural, beautiful markings. They have a very, very diagnostic, short, puffy, heart-shaped blow. And I think this is a whale that you could definitely see from Bolsa Chica. There's been many occasions where Bernardo and I have been birding in the area and been able to watch across, just across the street really, and look off and see a nice, short, puffy a gray whale blow. It's one of the few species that you would probably see an actual blow from land from Bolsa Chica, and it would be in closer to, close potentially to the beach. But that short, puffy blow is diagnostic to gray whales. And here you can see it is a heart-shaped blow at about 10 foot tall. And so a lot of these animals, well, they all have flukes. Their tails are called flukes. The two triangular areas together is their powerhouse, really, or the tail stalk leading up to that is really where they get their momentum. They move through the water by moving their tail up and down. It propels them along. Anybody have an idea? Want to tell me why their tails are horizontal instead of vertical like fishes? I'm going to say my non-naturalists because we have a couple of naturalists in the group, but can anybody describe, or maybe one of my naturalists can help share why their tails are horizontal? I see somebody, Susan, moving her hand up and down, but we can't hear her, of course. But yes, they move up and down. But why?
Is it because they evolved from land animals?
It has a part to do with it. What would be the evolutionary purpose for it, since for it to be horizontal instead of them to have just grown a straight tail like a dog, or maybe a vertical tail like a fish? Oh, good quiz. So one thing that's different, what's the difference than whales and fish? You didn't think this was going to be interactive, did you? I know, Zooms aren't usually interactive. Ha ha, fooled you.
I have a feeling it has to do with the bone structure.
Well, there's no bone in their flukes, but that's a good idea. Annie, yeah.
Is it because they have to breathe from the, from the surface air, so that, I don't know, I feel like that maybe has something to do with it.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Annie's got it here. I don't know, I didn't even bring my supplies, but I just happen to have a whale here. But yeah, exactly. So if their blowholes are on the top of their head, it's much more efficient for them to move through the water, moving their tail up and down, and then be able to come up to the surface. Where if they were moving side to side like a shark, it wouldn't be as efficient for them to come up to the surface. So it's a hydrodynamic movement, and allows them to continue in the same motion to come up to the surface and take a breath, and then just continue down. Yes, good one, Annie. See, just get you guys thinking a little bit instead of just watching. And here you can see the beautiful, so here you're seeing some of the barnacle scars, in fact. And then these are actually interesting little scarring as well. These are killer whale teeth marks. We call them rake marks. And we can tell that they are from killer whales for a couple of reasons. We know that killer whales are one of the biggest top predators of gray whales. But the way that we were able to confirm that is by measuring the distance between each of those lines and then comparing that to a typical killer whale, the distance between their teeth, and it definitely lines up. And it's just, I mean, obviously over the years too, we've seen it happen, but that's the primary way that you would confirm that, is to be able to measure that. So we know these are killer whale rake marks. Oh, a shameless plug. The aquarium does take a trip, and I'm really excited. We go down by boat. We've been doing this for, since 71. So that math really quickly is more than I want to. 50 years is our anniversary coming up this year. Oh, how exciting. I hadn't thought about that. Well, we take a boat out of San Diego, a long-range fishing boat, the third largest in the long-range fishing fleet. It's a super comfortable, amazing vessel. And we stop at islands on the way down to down to San Ignacio. We stop at remote uninhabited islands, and then we spend 3 full days in the gray whale birthing lagoons, breeding lagoons, where we're going out in small boats and watching whales and having whales come right up. We're anchored right in the middle of the lagoon. We have whales coming up and around our boat for 3 full days. And then on our way back, we stop at uninhabited islands again and do some more hiking. It's an amazing trip. It really, really is. I mean, I'm a little bit biased. I always just say, if you can ever get down to the lagoons in Mexico in any way, shape, or form, I think you should. It's just a really, really spectacular experience, and life-changing for sure, to have gray whale calves come up to you and be inquisitive and give you a chance to touch and interact with them is really, really an amazing experience. So those gray whales are down there giving birth to their young small calves, and then making a migration all the way from Baja all the way up to the Arctic, where they forage through the summer months. So these small animals, these newborn calves, after just a month or two of gaining weight, are going to make a migration of about 5,000 miles in one direction. And they do that every year, going back and forth to those lagoons and then up to their foraging grounds each year. One of the longest migrations of any mammal. And here's another picture of us having some fun in the lagoon. This whale actually insisted that I lean over and kiss it. I don't know what was going on with it. It just begged me and I had to do it. But we really have seen that over the years, these whales, there's only a few, about 10% of the whales are actually friendly. And the drivers have gotten to, the captains in the Mexican lagoons are experts at being very, very careful, not approaching the whales, waiting until the whales approach them. It's really one of the best, well-regulated whale watching industries I've ever experienced. It's really, really amazing if you ever have a chance to do this. And like I said, those calves are just so playful and excited to come over and say a quick hello. So moving on to other species, humpback whales. Now, humpback whales have probably just recently nailed the longest migration of any mammal, probably second only, or with the gray whales falling in a close second. Humpback whales, so many people always think of humpback whales as being the, the Hawaiian whale. But as I mentioned, boy, you can get some super exciting, thrilling sights of humpback whales right off of our coast. I mean, that might be the only other large whale that you could probably see from the Huntington Beach areas. You very well might see a humpback whale. Be a little bit further out probably than gray whales, but there is a possibility for sure. Humpback whales are known for their dynamic behaviors. They tend to breach a little bit more than other species. They have long pectoral fins, and here's their blow, which is a little bit taller than a gray whale's, and it still has a little bit of a V or a heart shape to it, but a taller heart shape. Anybody know why we have different shapes of these blows that I'm kind of showing you, and why they might be short and puffy or tall? And we'll see, a blue whale's blow can be up to 30 feet tall and column-like. Well, first they have different size and different animals, right? So different size species. So you have different size lungs, and lung capacity has a lot to do with it. Their downtime, their common, how long they're down and holding their breath has a lot to do with it. They're going to come up and have a huge exhalation. That might be a big part of it. And also the orientation of their blowholes on top of their head. So a gray whale blowhole is oriented out a little bit more than the humpback whale, whose blow is going to go a little bit more straight up. And the blue whales and fin whales, their blowholes are a little bit more parallel as well. And those help us out in the field. We can identify species at a distance by their blow. So as I mentioned, humpback whales are dynamic. Bernardo actually has, I quote him even when he's not on the top in the audience, but he has a theory that humpback whales, if you spend 45 minutes with them at any point, they're bound to do something fun and dynamic. They play with, interact with things in the water. They will swim over to kelp and roll in it, or breach, or tail slap or something. They're really, really interesting animals that tend to do a bit more dynamic behaviors. Here, this one's just peck slapping, so rolling around, rolling over, putting its long pectoral fin up in the air and then slapping it down on the surface. Their pectoral fins are a third of the length of their body, so about 15 feet in length. They're the only ones with really, really long pectoral fins. And here's one coming straight at us, and you can see the tubercles on it. These are these nodules on their, you can see them also here. Here are tubercles along their pectoral fins, and then you can see them here on their rostrum. The rostrum is the kind of the idea of the upper lip area between our blowholes, or our nose and our upper lip, elongated out, if you think about it, because here's their blowholes and here's their upper lip. So this area is the rostrum. And you can see those tubercles here. Each of those tends to have a hair follicle, so it is believed to be sensory, highly sensory, and but also it's been studied for hydrodynamics, and they think that there might be some component to it that has some hydrodynamic capabilities, which would be put in play here on their pectoral fins. So we won't get into this too long, but as I mentioned, into too much detail, but as I mentioned, recent study did, not a study, but it was actually a citizen science finding, found the longest known route of one animal individually. There was research that had, with humpback whales, you can study them by taking pictures of the underside of their tail or the underside of their flukes. They have the unique patterns and scarring and shapes on them. And so researchers will keep catalogs of the different flukes to be able to study them, their movements, and who they associate with, where they go, how old they are, completely non-invasively, right? All you have to do is be able to get a photo and do no invasive study on the injury to the animal at all. So anyway, there was a researcher who had a catalog of flukes in one of the two ranges, I think in Brazil, and was going through Flickr looking at, humpback whale flukes in somebody's travel, just people who post pictures, and found a match of the same animal in Madagascar. And just direct Brazil to Madagascar is 9,600 kilometers or so. I think that works out to be about 7,000 miles. And that's the longest migration of any one animal that we know of. So it was pretty amazing to see that. And that's not including their foraging grounds. It's likely they probably went to the Antarctic in between there. This was an interesting study called SPLASH, where it was a multinational, multi-agency, multi-ocean, multi-everything, a really, really great collaborative effort to try to study in a 5-year period all of the humpback whales in the North Pacific. And so this looks like just a mash of crazy lines, but if you just take a look at the colors, the different colors, and you can see it in the smaller image below, what they found were there are many breeding grounds in the lower latitudes, and they merge up to sharing some of the same feeding grounds in the higher latitudes. But we really were able to get a better idea of where these animals are migrating and traveling to. And they fed that information. Here you can see this. You can see that there are, a lot of people think of the Hawaiian humpback whales. Those animals go up to some areas in Alaska to feed. But they don't intermix with the animals that are off of California coast. There may be some rare occasion, I think 1 or 2 animals that have been seen off of California, but for the most part, they are their own unique population. The animals that we see off of California tend to breed here off of Mexico or even down into Central America off of Costa Rica. I had to throw in this picture just talking about breeding grounds, but this is a young humpback whale. I was actually in Australia when I saw this animal, and it couldn't have been more than a couple of days old. It was the cutest little animal. You can see it's really light in color, light gray. And it was so young that its little flukes were still floppy and kind of curled. It didn't really have the strength and structure yet. Its tiny little dorsal fin was still rolled over. It had, like I said, probably only been a couple of days old. And it was, oh my gosh, I could just ooh and ah about that for forever. It was so cute. But so here, the breeding grounds for humpback whales are, as I mentioned, in the lower latitudes that I saw. Here in California, we tend to be a feeding ground for humpback whales. The green areas are the feeding grounds, and then the numbered circles are the different breeding grounds. So humpback whales, because one of the SPLASH study helped, but there have been many studies in all the oceans looking at the different populations of humpbacks. And what they were able to just to identify were these 14 different breeding grounds. And looking at those different breeding grounds then, and doing population studies, a lot of the population studies were through photo identification, taking the pictures of their flukes. They were able to get an idea of how the populations were doing, if they were stable, if they were, what the numbers were like in each of these populations. And we actually were able to downlist or lower the classified status of many of these populations. And you can see all of the blue numbered breeding grounds of humpback whales are considered not at risk. And it's pretty amazing to think about that, because these are animals who have been classified as endangered. Many of them were classified as threatened, and taking them and delisting them and down classifying them to not at risk was really exciting in many ways, because, you know, a lot of us do a lot of conservation work trying to get the word out to save species, to save habitats. But it's very rare that we actually have a big success and we can say, gosh darn it, we did it. You know, all that work was for something. And in this case, it was really a big success. A lot of conservationists were a little worried that removing them or downlisting them would open them up to a variety of new threats. But, you know, again, we needed to look at some of those successes. So it was really exciting to be able to declare 9 populations not at risk. You notice that the animals that are foraging here off of California, they come from these populations number 5 and 6, and those still are either threatened or endangered, depending on which, there's a little bit of overlap, but depending on which breeding ground they come from. So the humpbacks here in California are still considered an endangered species classification. Here you can see them coming up out of the water, again, lunge feeding with the lower jaw. This is their lower jaw. There's 2 animals here, and that's full of water. They have these big expanding throat grooves that fill up, and the recent research has been studying the volume and capacity that they can hold within those throat grooves, those engulfing pleats, and they can actually fill up to almost 100% of their body size, filling up into one of those, into their own mouth. So it's amazing, the volume and capacity. Here you can see, again, the baleen coming down from the upper jaw and the lower jaw expanded, engulfing that prey.
Diane, I think you have a question in the chat.
Excellent. Oh, I don't see my chat box. Thank you for saying that, Kendra. Can somebody feed me the question? I don't see the chat box.
Marco had the question, says, Diane, my son would like to hear how they sleep when traveling such long distances.
Oh, that's a great question. I love talking about animals sleeping. It was kind of unfortunate how we found out, because we, you know, dolphins were being put under anesthetized to try to do research on them, or even surgeries and that sort of thing, or, you know, other procedures. And unfortunately, when they were put under, they would die. And it took a while, but it didn't take long, I mean, to figure out that why when they go to sleep, or when we put them under, they're not breathing any longer. And what it turns out is that whales, you know, they have to stay alert. They're swimming. They don't have to keep swimming because of like a shark who has to, you know, keep moving through the water. But they're in a liquid environment. They don't just settle at the bottom of the ocean, because they have to come up to the surface to take a breath. So they have to maintain an awareness of predators around them, but also what we call it a voluntary breathing. Fortunately, when I go to sleep, I don't have to think about taking a breath, right? I can just conk out, because I sleep pretty deep and sound. And boy, 8 hours later, if I had to think about my next breath, I'd be down. But fortunately, you know, so we're considered involuntary breathers. Whales are voluntary breathers. So they have to think about basically coming to the surface to open those blowholes to be able to exhale and then take a big inhale in. So what that means is, and that translates to, is they do what we call a unihemispherical resting. So they really just kind of rest half a brain at a time. They don't necessarily go into the deep slumber like I do, but they will just kind of start, you know, just shut down in a sense and rest part of the brain while they're continuing to travel, continuing to swim along. And every now and then you even see a whale, we call it logging, and they'll just be kind of just in maybe in a little bit of a slumber, where they're just a little bit just kind of drifting under the surface, just a little bit coming up and exhaling, drifting back down. And so they're just kind of in a half, what do they call it? Twilight, maybe a little bit. Good question. Good question. Here's a humpback whale playing with kelp. As I mentioned, they're really interactive. And I just realized I was a little chatterbug, and it's almost 8 o'clock already. So if it's time for me to shut up, I will just end it and we can take questions or something. But gosh, I'm kind of embarrassed. I didn't monitor my time very well at all.
That's quite all right. I think you have a captive audience. If no one opposes, we could probably go for maybe 10 more minutes and then we can take questions, but that's up to everybody. If anyone.
I mean, by all means, I won't be offended if you hang up. I'm getting thumbs up from Bill, so I'm gonna say I'm gonna keep going. I got lots of thumbs up. Good. You know, hang up if you have to go, obviously, and thank you for coming.
Yeah.
If you want, if you have questions, please let's turn to some questions. But I'll just keep jabbering on until we see that there's a couple questions, and I'll bump it up a little bit.
Sorry. And we are still recording, so if you need to log off, we'll be sending the full recording out, so you won't miss anything.
Cool.
But carry on, Diane.
So excellent. So so the other species that, well, one of the other species that's really exciting that we see here more frequently now are blue whales. And, you know, again, as I mentioned before, the largest whale ever on the planet that we know of. In the southern hemisphere, they have been recorded as large as like over 100 feet, 110 feet. One documented effort I saw was 110 feet, 2.5 inches, you know, and I don't know how you get to a half inch. That's when you get to that size, but it's fun, more fun to say. In the southern hemisphere, they get much larger. Their krill is more abundant and larger. Here in the northern hemisphere, here in the North Pacific, we see blue whales at, on average, about 75 feet, sometimes really nice large ones at 85 feet. And blue whales were one of the animals, blues and fins were the species that were really most impacted by whaling, especially in the early to mid 1900s. In the 1930s, the records show that they were taking 30,000 blue whales every single year. So we took a population of 300,000 down to what now we believe is about 15,000, and that's been recovering for quite some time. When we looked at fin whales, that's even worse. There's some 700,000 that were taken during the peak of the whaling. So I can't imagine what the world was like when there were that many whales in the ocean and that many large whales in the ocean. And fortunately, we're starting to see recovery in these species. The humpback whales that we were just talking about along the North Pacific, especially our side of the North Pacific, so we're in the eastern North Pacific, they've been recovering at a rate of about 7 to 8% consistently. Blue whales, they're recovering at a rate a little bit slower, in the 0 to 2% rate, a very, very slow movement. We believe that there's a lot of overlap with ship strike, unfortunately, and that a lot of animals are probably struck far offshore, so we really never have documentation of it. They definitely overlap with a lot of shipping lanes, and are animals that have a very high risk factor for ship strike. Here's their blows, a very tall column-like blow, as I mentioned before, up to 30 feet tall. So really, we can see them at quite a long distance when you're out on the water and looking for whales. We already talked about the whaling and the extent to which they were taken, and here's just some numbers. As I mentioned, up almost 300,000 in the pre-whaling days, and records do reflect that 30 to 40,000 or so were taken every year in the 30s. So fortunately, there are protections in place now, and most countries are no longer whaling. This was taken in 2007 in the near Anacapa in the Santa Barbara Channel, and it just so happened that year, unfortunately, they were feeding mid-channel, and we had a number of ship strikes in the Santa Barbara Channel, somewhere between 5 to 7, I believe, ship strikes that year of blue whales, but we haven't seen as many as often. That year, they just happened to be feeding right in the middle of the shipping lanes. They have,
We had a
Very, very,
question
what's
in
that?
the chat. Sorry, we had a question in the chat asking how wide they are.
How wide the average body of the blue whale is? 20 feet, I would say, perhaps. I think that sounds about, I mean, and then if you add their pectoral fins onto it, you're getting a little bit wider. They don't have long pectoral fins, but I would say their body, and they're also, as a matter of fact, looking at that, I was just going to mention this fluke picture here. So you see the flukes, and those are going to be about 15 feet wide, but their tail stalk, we call this the peduncle area. So the tail is where the muscles are that move those flukes up and down. And I think in the blue whale, you can really see that exaggerated muscle that moves that tail up and down, because if you go back to this photo here, you can see that they're very narrow from above when you're looking at that tail stalk. So this is that area I'm talking about. This is that peduncle area I'm talking about. But if you look at it from the side, it's a very, very wide muscle, a very tall muscle, I guess you might say. And that's to facilitate that movement up and down. That's that. The power stroke is the downward stroke in the whales. So then they will recover on the upstroke and then moving down again. And that's what helps propel them through the water. There's everything about them is just enormous and large. A blue whale calf is 20 to 25 feet long when it's born, a newborn. That's about the size of an adult killer whale, if you want to put it in perspective. But we are seeing them more and more frequently. And here you can even see, this is, I believe, the Gerald Desmond Bridge before it was becoming a different bridge here in the Long Beach or Terminal Island area. We've had several years of them coming in very, very close to shore, but typically they follow the food. So when they're here up off of California waters, they're going where the upwelling is. Right now they're seeing high numbers of blue whales in the Santa Barbara Channel. Highly recommend the Condor Express or even Island Packers out of Ventura to get out to the islands and see some blue whales. Like now, go this weekend if you can. It's amazing. Here's a picture that Bernardo took of a blue whale lunge feeding, and look how different and large it is compared to those humpback whales that we saw. Just for orientation, here's the upper jaw and that rostrum that we were talking about, and you can see the baleen hanging down, and then these are their throat grooves, those large engulfing throat grooves. Ship strike, as I mentioned, is one of the largest threats to blue whales, and their primary prey is krill or small red light crustaceans such as tuna crabs. They almost exclusively eat krill, unlike humpback whales that will adapt to whatever is most available. Humpback whales will eat small clustering fishes, schooling fishes such as sardines and anchovies, or they will adapt and adjust over to krill if it's more abundant. And just here's another, you're looking down into the empty lower jaw of that blue whale as it's engulfing its prey. And I just wanted to just go straight really quickly over to
and then Diane, you could show this. Sorry to interrupt. I picked this up off of this is
nerd
this
alert.
this is in my freezer at home because, you know, who wouldn't want
Why I love you.
blue whale poop, right? And it's bright red because it's all krill, right?
That's right. Yep.
Now I'm going to put it back in the freezer because it does kind of smell a little bit through the bag, but that's mine. I own
really
it.
Bad. And just imagine that's in your freezer. Maybe put it in another bag.
Yeah.
We do, well, you can collect a lot. You can collect a lot of information by collecting fecal matter. And for example, we could put that under a microscope and you could see what type of krill they're foraging on, because the krill are a crustacean, so their exoskeleton will not digest. And so there's parts of their exoskeleton in that, in the fecal matter. And so, yeah, nerd. I love that about you, but yeah, you're a nerd. Got poop in your freezer. As I mentioned, the blue whales are just spectacular. They just have so many amazing, you know, wows. Their heart is the size of a small car. Ours is the size of our fist, right? So that's the size of our heart, and theirs is the size of a blue car, to put that in perspective. And their tongue is the weight of a terrestrial elephant. You know, it's just amazing. The largest terrestrial mammal is an elephant. Just touch on fin whales really quick. I've really had a fascination with fin whales, and we're seeing them here more and more recently. Fin whales in our Fin whales get to be also about 75 to 85 feet, much like the blue whales in the Northern Hemisphere. Fin whales are unique in their coloration. They're the only asymmetrically colored animal in the world. So they are always white on the right on their lower jaw. And that pattern is thought to perhaps be for helping to flash fish. They turn that white jaw towards the fish, that the whiter color clusters fish up into a tighter ball to be able to engulf their prey. Humpback whales have white on the lower underside of their pectoral fins that's believed to be the same purpose. They will turn their pectoral fins in with the white towards the fish, flashing the fish the white color, which helps cluster them into a tight ball to allow them to engulf that prey. As I mentioned before, fin whales now we know much more taken. They were the heavily hunted animal and species, and still are, unfortunately. This chart is not intended for you to read or understand in any way, shape, or form, but it's referring to scientific data that was had been buried, not released, and eventually was uncovered, and talking about the different numbers of animals that were not reported, that were hunted in Russia. Here you can see some examples of bluefins. 158,000 had not been reported, 180,000 had been. So the numbers were really increased when we started to uncover some of the hidden catch data. Look at this, over 2 million whales of different species caught in the southern hemisphere alone in the peak of the whaling days. It's just really incredible numbers when you really think about it. Fin whales, we took over 70% of their worldwide population during from whaling. Oh, there's the chat box. It just popped up on my other screen. They are globally classified as endangered, and we believe there's about 84,000 left in the world now, still hunted, as I mentioned, by some countries. But we get them here in Southern California more and more frequently, and it's really been amazing to see them. They tend to be here in the winter and spring, and then also sometimes in the summer and fall. So we have possibilities of seeing them almost all year round. Also have a very, very tall blow or exhale in and around 25 feet tall, much like a blue whale. Kind of hard to tell a blue whale with an untrained eye. It's pretty hard to tell a blue whale from a fin whale. But when you see here's that white right lower jaw. I was looking for their dorsal fin, named the fin whale for a reason. Their dorsal fin is very, very tall and quite obvious when you see them at sea. But going back to this, here's that white right lower jaw you can see. And I love this image that Kristen Campbell, a naturalist down in Newport, let me utilize for this, showing an aerial photo, one of her drone pictures, showing that white right lower jaw from above. It's just an incredible picture. Bernardo,
sorry,
yeah.
Let me interrupt. We have another question from the chat. Someone mentioned seeing a dead whale on the shore and asking what is the phenomena behind it. I know there are many causes of death for whales, but
yeah, it would be hard to say. I mean, specifically when and where we might be able to talk to some specifics, but we do have. I just wanted to show you this really quick, and then I'll show you. But Bernardo caught this photo. A bird flew through it and threw it out of focus. But you can see that the baleen is white on the right side as well, but only partially. Here, the baleen changes to dark color, and it corresponds with the white right lower jaw. And here's that tall dorsal fin. So I think that's a really good question, and I can actually talk really quickly about just some of the threats to our large whale species. Just to answer that question, it was part of what we were talking about, maybe going into anyway. I just moved the slide a little bit lower. Here we go. Does this? Maybe I have to get out of this. Oh my gosh, and then you're gonna see my horrible desktop with all my crazy tabs open. There we go. So yeah, until we take a close look at an animal once it's been washed up on shore or found dead, it takes quite a bit of, forensics, just like a human autopsy. We do an animal necropsy, and we can take samples of tissues. We do, we start with a physical observation, to an assessment to see if we can find anything obvious. Oftentimes ship strike can be very obvious, but here's kind of the large list of, just like humans, things that will, unfortunately, are some of the main causes of death of whales. And some of it can be natural disease, but they can get parasite infestations. But harmful algal blooms, which I'm sure is something that's kind of a common discussion in a wetlands habitat, but we do get harmful algal blooms, and those can have really negative impacts on large whale species. As I mentioned before, ship strike is definitely one of the leading causes of death in large whales. Entanglements, unfortunately, are a huge problem for whales around the world. Over 300,000 whales, or cetaceans, are entangled and die of entanglement every year. Small, everything from pods of dolphins to large whales. And then there's numbers of pollution exposures and trauma, and then starvation. We're dealing with that right now with gray whales. We're in the middle of what we call an unusual mortality event, or a UME. Looking at gray whales that have been emaciated, they wash up on shore and their fat stores are completely gone, and their blubber is even narrower and kind of dry, and we can get really good indications that they're starving. We had that warm water mass off of the West Coast for a number of years, and that influenced the Arctic as well. And if you don't have the ice forming in the Arctic, then you don't get the rich habitat that, so basically when you get ice, the ice that forms in the Arctic, algae grows on the bottom of it. And then when the ice recedes, the algae falls to the ocean floor, and that kind of creates a supply of food and a food source. So when you don't have that ice forming, you don't get the algae, you don't have that really good food chain and food supply. And so when no ice was there, it kind of led to later down the line, gray whales several years later starting to show signs of starvation and emaciation. So right now we're seeing large numbers of gray whales dying up and down the coast from Mexico to Canada. That's a good question.
I think we have one more question. I think it is 8:17, so I think if you don't mind, we could always have you back and continue another discussion, which I think everyone here would enjoy. But I think we will open it up for questions now.
Yeah, for sure.
Just for sake of time, so people aren't staying up past their bedtimes.
Totally agree. I'm just going to move to a prettier picture, hopefully, here, but just so we can end on a nicer note. There
Thank you, Diane. This has been wonderful talk. Jen had a question in the chat. What are some mitigation measures to decrease the amount of ship strikes?
That's a good question, and there have been some efforts, especially off of the California coast, about relocating the shipping lanes. They tried moving them to, or did studies, and then even attempted moving them to outside of the moving the shipping lane to the outside of the Santa Barbara Channel. But what happens is then they overlap with a different species, and so there may be an abundance of blue whales in the middle of the Santa Barbara Channel, but then when you move the shipping lanes to outside the Santa Barbara Channel, there's an abundance of fin whales or humpback whales, and then you kind of have to pick which whale is, and they have done assessments. There is, there are, population numbers, and how many individuals can you lose in a population to still make it sustainable? And so sometimes you have to pick, okay, we have humpback whales are a little more successful, so maybe we move the shipping lanes into like an area where the humpbacks are. But right now there's also air quality incentives to slow down in this, like in main hotspot areas, especially in the Santa Barbara Channel, and that was they're able to do that by because of the proximity to shore. So if you want to go through the Santa Barbara Channel, which is a shorter route, getting into the main ports, from port to port, then you need to, you know, slow down a little bit, and that helps. Or burn the I'm sorry, I'm getting it a little bit mixed up here. But the air quality measures are helping to slow ships down and reduce ships in the overlapping areas. And, you know, buying less stuff from, I think, you know, that goes back to buying American, and just reducing our consumption of stuff would be a huge answer to pollution and plastics and shipping as well. You know, there is an interesting article, if anybody wants to look it up, Michael Moore wrote, that, you know, basically says we are killing whales because we're buying stuff from, you know, from Asia and having it shipped in. And that's the primary reason ships are coming, are cargo ships full of stuff for us. And so, you know, if we quit importing and just quit buying so much, you know, that would really reduce our pollution and plastics and our you know, shipping. And so, good question.
Awesome.
I
I think we're, oh, sorry, continue, Annie. I was gonna say we're opening up to questions. You can stop, we don't have to do it in the chat. You can just unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay.
Annie.
Yeah, no, I do have a question that's sort of along the same lines. So you talked earlier about how there's been more ecotourism in the spring, summer, fall months. Does that have any contribution to deaths at all? Or is it mainly just like bigger ships? Yeah.
No, that's a really good question, Annie. You know, unfortunately, most of the deaths do tend to be caused by larger vessels. That smaller boats definitely could cause major injury to whales, especially depending at the speed by which they might, you know, collide. But a lot of the major impacts we see are from larger ships, and it really only takes a speed of 12 knots or more, so about 12 miles an hour. Studies have shown that anything under 12 miles an hour tends to be able to reduce that, you know, the rate by which they might kill the animal. I think, you know, there's other threats with too many boats and too many small boats. There does tend to be an increase in stress hormones such as cortisol, long-term stress. If you look at gray whales migrating up and down the coast, and you think about every major city that they travel adjacent to has boats that goes out to watch it. You know, they're not just being watched or seen by boats in San Diego, but it's like, you know, San Diego and then Oceanside and then Southern Orange County and LA and, you know, all the way up the coast. So they have, you know, just imagine if somebody was just there kind of poking at you or buzzing around your head, you know, constantly. But there definitely does seem to be impact. There's been studies that even show that, you know, even quiet vessels or even kayaks and paddle boards and small vessels can also increase the stress. We can study blow rates, and then also the more advanced studies can take samples from their blow or skin tissues and study the levels of the stress hormones to be able to indicate the levels of stress.
But
that said, there's also the educational component that comes from it. And I think awareness, you know, I'm a huge advocate for safe whale watching, and it's what I do. And I love teaching people to go out and inspire and excite people about whales. I think that, you know, we have to weigh the benefits to the, you know, to the risks of that, and what benefits that we get from taking people out, showing them whales, letting them see them in their wild habitat and their natural habitat, and getting excited about them. And we can easily watch whales safely from afar in a boat from a safe distance and get a really, really exciting experience. And I think that has a lot to do with, you know, I think that really should be looked at also and weighed.
I have a question again. I think I read somewhere about like some studies or tests with technology of using like sonar and whatnot to kind of deter whales from around ships to lessen the amount of collisions. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it doesn't seem to really be effective to be able to to scare whales away from ships, as far as we can tell so far. There have been studies that have tried to emit sound from, maybe from the front of a ship. Some of these ships, think about their size. They're really, really large. So, a sound emitted here, but the ship is still traveling and its props are still way back here. The ship's designs these days are moving very efficiently through the water, and most of the sound is propagated out to the back of the ship. So it is quiet at the front of the vessel, that's for sure. But whales just haven't evolved with a sense to detect and avoid. The other thing to think about is that an animal whose life source is at the surface, it needs to come to take a breath, to come to the surface to take a breath. When it feels threatened, chances are it's going to come to the surface. So if it hears a scary sound, or if it doesn't know, what those sounds mean yet. There's no training, so to speak. They haven't learned to avoid certain sounds. So, one thing that they do see is that they may come to the surface. Studies, there have been several behavioral response studies putting tags on whales and trying to determine what they do in response to Navy sonar, for example. Some of those have overlapped with some really great shipping data. And what they find with blue whales is that it depends on what their behavior is at the time. If they're foraging, food might be so scarce for an animal that large who could actually eat 4 tons of krill in a day during its peak feeding season. Food is probably a priority. And this study has supported that by showing that if they're foraging, they're probably going to keep foraging, even if they're hearing maybe Navy sonar or some other loud noises. But if they're resting, they may wake and dive deeper. So it depends also on their behaviors. And if anybody is interested in ship strike information, Cascadia Research has done a lot. I would highly recommend Jen checking out Cascadia Research website. They've got a lot of information about the work they've done with ship strike and ship avoidance. Yeah,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's kind of funny on the grid, I look at the person, my face is not following the camera, but I'm looking over here at Jen's picture, for example, or Annie. Great questions, you guys. Sorry I went over. Probably half asleep, or go pour a glass of wine and come back. Any other questions?
I have another. Did you always know that you had a passion for whales, or what kind of drove you to that path?
No, I always did. I always had an interest in it, and I can't remember. I mean, my mom and dad are actually on the line. They might be able to give better insight. We haven't had the conversation, but I think that I was always excited about whales and dolphins, and my family was from San Diego. We spent a lot of time there, and I'm going to venture to say that probably my first experiences were with SeaWorld and seeing dolphins and watching Flipper. I mean, I loved the idea of a familiar animal, kind of, but I haven't since invested my time into dogs, because those are the ones that I feel like should be a pet, and go out and see them in the wild. But then I became the desert nerd who everybody knew I liked dolphins and whales. And, so for probably the last 15 years I lived in the desert. My house was full of dolphin stuff, and all my friends knew that that's what I was really into. And I finally had a friend who was taking a real strong interest in the tuna dolphin issue, and kind of set me on that path. And I did a lot of campaigning and a lot of field work out in the desert in regards to the tuna dolphin issues. And that was probably my first advocacy work, was in